Okay, so you're logged in for Is Owning a Dog a Strength? And I would like to introduce you to your presenters, Lynn Steiner and Lynda Killoran. Welcome.
All right, thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those of you on the West Coast. We're going to just get started because we don't have a whole lot of time. I want to say that I'm really thrilled that we had so many people join us for this session. And I also confess to Lynda that I'm actually a little bit terrified with how many people are here. But I think I'm also really gratified because I think this shows that there's sort of a need for some practical sessions. And so we're hoping that we can at least partly fill that need. So let me share my screen. So my name is Lynn Steiner. I am with the Center for Innovation and Population Health at the University of Kentucky. And I'd like my co-presenter, Lynda Killoran, to introduce herself.
Hello, my name's Lynda Killoran, and currently I am a therapist at Centerstone in Southern Illinois.
And so we're going to, actually, I think I am. Sorry, I have a lot of screens going on. I need to figure out. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we know that we don't have a whole lot of time. We would love to have had this presentation be an hour and a half or 2 hours. So we are going to go through it pretty quickly because I don't know if anyone attended the session with Robin Orlando Price and Alicia Eicher yesterday. They talked a lot about adult learning and how really for adults, we really want to get to the doing part. So we're going to do a little bit of presenting, but mostly we're hoping to do some doing. And the challenge is we have about 80 people in this session. So it's going to look a little bit different. Because we have so many people, we're going to encourage you to use the chat box rather than to unmute yourself. And we're going to be following the chat box pretty closely. So we'll try to address any questions that people have. And we're also going to ask you a lot of questions. So we're going to want you to please participate, give us your answers, because while we can't be as engaging in this presentation as we'd like to, we do want it to be a presentation where we're sharing a lot of ideas, and a lot of those ideas we're hoping are going to come from you. So we will have access to the chat box afterwards, and we'll be able to share that. We'll be able to pull out a lot of suggestions and techniques and ideas and things that have worked that people come up with, and we will definitely share that with you. Okay, so this is the disclosure that we all are required to do. And then this is our agenda, which we'll see if we stick to that or not. So, we're starting out with the idea of why are we presenting on this topic? And I think just based on the number of people that are here, I don't know that we really need to answer that question. I think that question is kind of answered with your presence. But Lynda and I have been working together for quite some time. She works in the field, and I'm working, in training and coaching. And we've talked a lot about how there's this real need to include strengths in the assessment planning process and in the assessment process. And most people agree that being able to identify strengths is really important when you're working with someone, and using those strengths is also really important, but people struggle with how to actually do that in practice. So, part of it is people are not necessarily trained on how to do that. Sometimes they're not really comfortable with doing that. And so with strengths, along with needs, any kind of assessment is often challenging for people who have not done it before. So there's a concern that it might actually turn into more of an interview or an interrogation rather than a conversation, which is what, with the TCOM tools, we really hope an assessment process looks like, is a conversation between the individual and the assessor. So with strengths in particular, needs usually come to the surface pretty quickly, but strengths are sometimes a little bit difficult to find. Sometimes people say, I can't think of any, or I can't identify anything. It's also easier to identify needs because usually people come to you because they have needs. And, probably no one's ever come to you and said, these are all the strengths that I have. Oh, and I have this one need too, right? It's usually the needs. And then the effort is on our part is going to be to actually identify strengths. So we know that when you engage the individual and you have a conversation about strengths, it leads to better information gathering and then use of the information to help that individual tackle needs, but also grow and end up being able to have a happy and productive life. So these are our learning objectives. We titled our talk, Is Owning a Dog a Strength, for a very specific reason. And that is because we want you to be thinking about strengths from a very broad and creative perspective. I was listening to DeLacy's talk this morning, and he talked about a lot of really great things that people are probably going to remember more than what I'm going to say. But one of the things that struck me is he talked about a young man who built a treehouse and talked about sort of how excited he got to be able to explain how he did that. So that's a strength, that we might not necessarily think of that as a strength, but there are so many pieces of that can be used to engage that young person, to focus on the things that he does well, and to think about skills in that interest that could be used in other things. So we want you to think about strengths, not just the usual kinds of strengths, like what kind of talent somebody has, or if they have a strong family network, but think more broadly. Empathy is a strength. Being able to sleep well is a strength. Owning a car is a strength in some communities. And so that was going to be our original title of the talk, Is Owning a Car a Strength? But we went with Is Owning a Dog a Strength? And I'll explain that in a second. We also want to discuss ways, and again, this is sort of where we want to use the chat box to, ways to elicit strengths during the assessment process in a more natural and intentional way. And identify strengths then that we can then use to create strength-based goals and strategies. So strengths identification, we all know what a strength is, right? Everybody uses the same definition of a strength. We all sort of perceive it the same way, right? So our first question to you is, what is a strength? And this is where we want to take advantage of the chat box and have you put something in the chat box, just from your perspective. It doesn't have to be long or complicated, but when you think about a strength, what comes to your mind? And then Laura's going to help us read out some of the things that people say.
Something you are good at, Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
Things that are working well in your life. When you're in a crisis or at your lowest, you turn to something that provides value or benefit to your life, positive attributes, a protective action, support, family, something that helps you be able to navigate society, a positive about the youth or family, something that provides meaning and feeds the spirit. What is going well or is helping us, supports, things that bolster you, something that makes you proud, feel good about, something positive. What you do well, a talent, something that comes easy to you, calming activities, something you like about yourself, things that bring joy to your life, something that makes you feel good also, something that provides you happiness, something that helps you get through tough times, something you're good at or use for coping. Things are considered good for a person in any way.
Okay.
A positive, healthy attribute you can use to make your life more meaningful.
Okay. I think we're kind of getting the picture. So we'll stop there because I know there are a lot of you and we'd like to read off everyone, but we can't at the moment. But I think what you heard, I think, is pretty much a common thread here of, strengths are good things. They can be used for certain purposes, but they can also just be intrinsically good. They can just be things that are, positive, that make you feel good about yourself, that make you happy. So you don't have to necessarily use a strength. You can just have it. Because we're at the TCOM conference, we chose a definition of strengths that includes everything pretty much that people have talked about here. But here's our official description. For those of you who've been involved in training, you've seen this. And so we define a strength as a characteristic of an individual in an environment or an external factor that provides the individual meaning and well-being. So, there's nothing special about this definition, but we wanted to make sure we started somewhere when we're having a conversation about strengths. So we know that strengths, even in your definitions here, you focus on different pieces of it, and there are different ways to look at strengths. So like, people, they come in all shapes and sizes. And sometimes they're obvious and sometimes they're not. So sometimes we have to look a little bit harder to find out what the individual considers a strength, or help the individual think about reframing things so that they actually see that they do have a strength when they think that they don't. We know that strengths can be internal strengths. So the CANs or the ANSA, the TCOM tools, they don't divide strengths into internal or external, but we know that some of them are more likely to be internal to a person, like a talent, versus external or environmental, like having a strong family. And we think that identifying strengths is important for lots of reasons. So we have a couple of reasons here. For one thing, when you think you have a strength, you tend to feel better about yourself. Strengths will also sometimes give us a sense of purpose or motivation. Importantly, and I mentioned this earlier, we often focus on needs. And so we forget that we have strengths, or we don't make them a priority. So identifying strengths helps us to reprioritize them, to make them as important as needs. The other thing that I think is interesting that Lynda and I were talking about is sometimes we minimize our strengths because we think it's just who we are. It's just a part of who we are. So I'm a very detail-oriented person, and I don't always think about that as a strength until I run into a lot of people who are not detail-oriented. And then I realize, oh yeah, this is actually a really good quality. So sometimes it's just such a part of us, we don't really think about it as a strength. And so we need somebody else to shine a spotlight on that to say, oh yeah, I guess it is. So it's important to identify these strengths and sort of take them from where they're unseen into the scene. And then for the next step that we're going to talk about later, we can use them to help us in the recovery process. So I'm going to turn this over to Lynda to talk about some potential tools that we can use to help us identify strengths.
Hello. So what are some tools that can help us to identify the strengths? Well, during the assessment, strengths identification can occur in many different ways. Obviously, we're interacting with the person and asking them for their feedback, so you get the client self-report. But also you can, there's certain times you can maybe do some observations about someone. For example, do they have good verbal skills? Maybe they show a sense of humor, things of that nature. So sometimes the content of the interview you can pull some information from. Sometimes it's very difficult because someone might have to have some direct questioning that you're doing, some set questions that maybe you found that are natural for you to ask that elicit some answers. Especially with children or with individuals who are maybe saying they don't have any strengths or have a hard time identifying them. if we can involve others, significant others in their lives that know the person well, that can maybe give us some feedback. And you'll also see that you can sometimes even ask the person, like, well, what would your partner say? Who's given you some compliments before? Or what have you gotten compliments from? So there's ways to involve others in that process as well. Sometimes we have to do this because we have to take the information and put it, depending on where you work, into a report of some sort. And so we're looking for a more structured or standard way to identify them and report them, but we might be able to collect them in a way that's more natural and gets us a lot more information. There are many strength-based tools you can Google out. There's a million of them out there. We're not endorsing any of the ones that we have here today, though I have used a couple of them. So some of those that we've used is the 40 Developmental Assets, which is from the Search Institute, Values and Actions, which is really good. There's the DISC Personal Assessment Tool, and then the Clifton Strengths Assessment, which is actually a book. I actually find that one useful for yourself. For this particular purpose, because this is what we're focused on, this is what we're most familiar with and we're good at, we'll use the TCOM tools, the ANSA, the CANS, and the FAST, to frame our discussion and our strengths activities because we know them and use them. Back to you, Lynn.
Yeah, and just to highlight, we're not endorsing any tool. We want you to be, obviously, if you're here, you're using one of the TCOM tools, and since that was most familiar, that's kind of where we're going to frame the remainder of our discussion. We did want to remind everyone that in Socio, as part of our presentation, we do have a number of resources for you that we've developed that we hope will be useful. And one of them is a document that has links to all of these assessment tools that we have in the slide, as well as some articles on identifying strengths and strengths in the literature. So if those are things that interest you, you can access that document in Socio. Okay, so we talked about strengths and why we want to identify strengths. Now we want to talk a little bit about, so how do we actually gather this information? And so Lynda already said, in an interview or I guess I was going to say in person, but I guess it could be on video right now with the way things are. but when you're meeting with the individual in whatever format that is, there's going to be some sort of conversation and back and forth. And Lynda had already mentioned that you can gather information just from that encounter. So it's mainly about asking questions, but it's also about gathering other information from the environment. So, for instance, if you're having a conversation about a need and the individual alludes to something that sounds like it could be a strength, you can pick up on that and go back to it and say, when we were talking about this, I heard you talk about this, and that actually sounds like a really useful thing, and then sort of exploring that. So listening to what they have to say when they're sort of talking about something else is one useful way. Another is to look at the things that they bring in with them to the interview. So if somebody's wearing an interesting pin, or they have a unique bag, or they are wearing a colorful scarf. There are those visual cues that can tell you something about an individual that you might want to follow up on. So if somebody's wearing a bird pin, you might ask them, I see you're wearing a bird pin, do you happen to like birds? And that's kind of a way to start getting them to talk about their talents and interests. The other thing we have here is to try to ask questions in a different way. So for those working with children, you can ask them questions, and oftentimes the answer is no or yes. It's a one word. So sometimes you need to tackle gathering information by trying to reframe something in a different way. And I think Lynda gave a good example of that when she said, if they don't have an answer, maybe ask their parent to give you information, or ask the child, well, if your teacher were to say something about what you do really well in school, what do you think your teacher would say? So framing, getting that information from using a different kind of question. Also, you want to think about those other visual cues about how someone interacts. So not just visually like what they look like, but for instance, I'm using my hands when I'm talking. And so we can get a sense when someone's talking to us, are they excited about something? Are they interested in something? Are they not interested in something? You know, are they kind of tuning out? Are they, so you can get information from them, you know, are they animated when you ask them a question about something? Maybe that's something to follow up on and see if there's more information there that's going to be useful. So does their affect change when you change topics? These are all ways that we can try to engage somebody during the assessment process to pull out information. And here is where I wanted to stop for a second and use the chat box again and ask if there are other techniques that people use that they find successful in the assessment process. So anything, either any of these strategies that I just mentioned or other things that we haven't mentioned where, you know, you found particularly successful in trying to gather information. So again, if you have suggestions, things that have worked for you that you found helpful, please put those in the chat box and we'll have Laura read those out.
And as a sidebar, you know, through this pandemic, having to do a lot of phone calls, getting, you know, the skill of being able to pick up when people's voices get more excited about things, and saying, wow, you're really excited about that. Tell me more about it. You know, I can almost feel them smiling when they're talking about this thing that they have a lot of passion for. So sometimes we can't really see them, but we can pick up those cues in their voice and in their inflections.
So far we have self-disclosure. Everyone has superpowers. What are yours? Mm-hmm. Asking people to identify someone else's strengths, such as asking a parent to describe the strengths of their child.
So I'm curious about the person who wrote self-disclosure. Do you mean sort of tell them something about yourself to help them to sort of give them a sense of, oh, that's what you're looking for, or oh, I have that as well? Is that what you mean?
So that's Cynthia. Yes, she said.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so one of the things that I found very helpful is a little bit of self-disclosure, because I think it humanizes yourself and it does feel as if I'm asking you to share this information, but rather I can also be part of this information and kind of just understand where it is that you're going with this and kind of just really meet them where they're at when it comes to strength, what I mean from self-disclosure.
Okay, thanks.
You want me to read some more, Lynn?
Yes, sure.
When a youth comes into care, inquire about the items they have with them.
Mm-hmm.
When asking a youth, ask, what would your friends say was good about you? And when I get a youth on probation, I've always asked them if I could check out their bedroom as a way to get an idea of their interests, not just to observe their bedroom to enforce their probation. Another one says, describe yourself in your own words.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you have the opportunity to be in someone's home environment, there are lots of great clues there. Okay, well, thank you for that information. You know, we hope that, if you think of other ways or, you have particular questions that you use to start the conversation around trying to gather strengths, feel free to put that in the chat box as well. So I know we're kind of flying through this. We want to make sure we get to everything. So apologies, but we have a group activity. So what we want to do is we want to give you some exposure to a potential way of doing an assessment with Lynda as our assessor, to have you look at some strategies that she uses to gather information. So the purpose of this activity, we're going to do about a 10-minute assessment. And for those of you that are observing the assessment, what we want you to do is observe any of the techniques that Lynda uses. So if she asks questions, write down ask questions. If she comments on something the person's wearing, write down comments on something the person is wearing. You don't have to detail every single thing she does, but if you've noticed that she's using a couple different techniques, have her do that. And then we also want you to write down any usable strengths that come out of this assessment. So usable from TCOM is any strength that would be rated a 0 or a 1, a strength that could be used in treatment planning. So something that seems like it's a centerpiece or usable. Anything that you see or hear, and again, you don't have to worry about cans or answer terms, but if the person says I like birds, you can put down likes birds. So anything that you hear. And then Lynda and the person who's doing this with her will also try to be aware of what they're observing during the same time. So we're going to need a volunteer. Is there anyone here who likes to be in the limelight, who would like to pretend to be an individual coming in with a problem?
Please.
I could call on one of my fellow colleagues, like Michelle.
And say I can help out. I'm a trainer and I know how.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Okay, Joanne, thank you so much. So we're gonna do about 10 minutes. So it's 2:15, so about 2:25.
Okay. Hi, Joanne.
Hi.
Thank you for coming in today. Could you give us just kind of a brief explanation of what's going on for you that made you decide to come in and see us today?
Sorry, really quick. Is this like you just want me to like pretend that I'm a person that you're working with, like through the cans or whatever?
Yeah, just
okay.
What brought you in today? Sorry, we didn't give you a setup for that.
No, that's okay. All right. So yes, I'm here because my social worker told me that I needed to come and speak with you and that we were going to be getting ready for a meeting coming up in another couple weeks.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit why the social worker thought that a meeting might be good for you?
They thought that I would be able to, sorry, my phone is ringing over here. They thought that I would be able to maybe benefit from some services or something to help with my kids. So they wanted me to meet with you to see what might go on my case plan.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit about what's going on with your kids?
Sure. They're in foster care right now. There was something that happened at home, and so they were removed a few weeks ago. Okay.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about what happened that resulted in them being removed?
Well, me and my boyfriend got into a fight. I don't think it was all that bad, but it was our nosy neighbors called the cops and they responded and they said that it wasn't safe for my kids to be at home with me.
Okay. So you're putting together a family team to try and help figure out ways that we can help your family to get through this time.
Yeah, that's what the social worker said.
Okay. All right, then. So I'm going to just ask some questions, get to know you a little bit better. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So the first thing I'd like to find out more about is, could you tell me a little bit about like what you feel like your personal strengths are?
I don't know. It's always kind of hard to talk about your strengths. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Can you, do you have any things that you like to do? Any hobbies, interests?
I like to take pictures.
Mm-hmm. Like with a camera? Do you have a film camera or like a digital camera, or how do you
Just
do that?
just on my phone, just the digital pictures. I like to take pictures of my kids and, things when we're out and about.
Nice. Okay. And then do you do anything with those pictures? Or
Sometimes I'll edit them and and then sometimes I'll have them printed out, or we have them around the house, or I put them on our digital picture frame just so that the kids can see them.
wow, that's nice. So you share those pictures with the kids and they get to look at them later too and remember the good times. It's
Yeah,
cool.
they always say they always comment on the pictures and like, remember when we did this or remember when we did that.
Mhm. Do you have any other interests or hobbies or things that you like to do?
Um, Sometimes I like to go for a run.
Mhm. Can you tell me more about that? Like, where do you run at?
I just run at the school that's behind my house. There's a track there, and so sometimes I'll go over there to run and get some exercise.
Okay. So you guys live near the school?
Yeah, it's right behind our house.
Okay. Um, can you tell me a little bit about the important relationships that you have in your life, like friends, family, things like that?
Yeah, my parents live close by, and I have some friends that that I hang out with, but we haven't seen them as much lately.
What can you tell me the barriers to that?
Sometimes my
To seeing,
boyfriend gets mad if I go out and want to hang out with my friends. So it's just not worth the fight sometimes.
okay. But you do have some friends that you used to spend time with?
Yeah, they check in on me pretty frequently, and they help out with, school pickup and things like that if I can't get to the school to pick up my kids.
Okay. Do you belong to like any kind of hobbies or groups or clubs or church or anything like that?
I used to go to church. I haven't for a little while, but I used to go to church sometimes.
Okay. Is that something that you would like to return to doing, or?
Um, I mean, I used to like when I would go, but I don't know if it's a good fit. I think I might maybe be interested in a different kind, like a different church maybe or something. I don't know, but it was something that I did like to do
You used
sometimes.
to like to do it? Okay, great. When you were a kid, what did you like to do when you were a child? What was your favorite things to do?
I would I would draw, or sometimes I had a journal that I would write in. So those are some things that I would do. And I played sports growing up. So those were some things that I guess occupied my time.
Mhm. So you were an athlete?
Uh, yeah, I
Okay.
played basketball and softball and in middle school and high school.
You still got a little of that athlete in you?
Um, I suppose so, a little bit. I like to
Yeah.
run and I like to
Okay.
stay active.
Okay.
And I
That's
like
great.
to watch my kids play sports too.
Ah, okay. What are they into?
Basketball mostly.
Basketball? Are you one of the like coaches or help transport the children or?
No, I mean I have to get my kids to their practices. So I do that all the time. So and sometimes, we have to travel, and so we regularly do those things.
Could you tell me, you mentioned your parents. Could you tell me, if I asked them, what would they say are your strengths or things that, they like about you?
I think that they would say that I work really hard, and that I'm smart and I've gone to school and gotten an education. And I think that they would probably say that I take good care of my daughter and son.
Okay. One last question. Is there anything that you've always wanted to do that you haven't been able to do yet, or learn more about, or something like that?
I've always wanted to go back to school. I always liked history classes and things like that. And it's just something I was always interested in. So I think having some sort of place where I could learn new things would be kind of cool.
Okay. So I'm wondering if our conversation that we just had maybe stirred up a little bit more of maybe what you would consider to be some of your own strengths.
I mean, I'm a really involved mom, so I'm always there for my kids, picking them up from school or getting them to practices. And, I always make sure that they have the things that they need, so I think that those are things that I would say is a strength of mine, that they always are. I'm just very involved. I always want to know what they're doing and be with them a lot.
It seems like it might be
Joanne, and I wanted to point out that that was a strength too, of being involved and volunteering for us. Thank you so much.
Yes. Yeah, I think that this is a natural time to break. I know that we would have loved to do it much, much longer and gotten more information, but thank you so much, Joanne. So what I'd like to do is hear from all of you what you've seen. So what we're going to do is I'm going to share a whiteboard. So I don't know if anybody has used the whiteboard before. If you go to the top of your screen, you should see something that says view or viewing, and then you should have the option to annotate. And so what I'd like everyone to do, although we might end up getting on top of each other, but that's okay. Can everyone see the whiteboard, by the way? Yeah, okay. So if you want to go ahead and just start to write on there both any strengths that you heard in this conversation and any needs that you heard as well. Okay, friends, I see. Talents and interests, concrete supports. Good mom. Social network, family lives close, journaling. Good eye contact, confident follow through with appointment, photography, goes for runs, has family in town, goes on outings, good with technology, active in kids' activities, organized, hard worker, smart, educated, calm. Yes, a lot of stuff there. Buildable hob, which I'm thinking maybe is hobbies. Okay, so we've got a need here, safety with boyfriend. Do we identify any other needs? Got involved with kids, lives near school. Okay. All right, this is good. So okay, isolation is another need. Okay, are there any other needs? Her kids have been removed from her, so reunifying the family might be a need. Okay, all right, I think we're gonna stop. I'm gonna save this. And I'm gonna bring the PowerPoint back. Okay. So thanks for contributing to that. So we have some needs and strengths. And I'm interested again in the chat box, if you could think about what techniques or questions that Lynda used seem to be effective in getting specific information. You know, like the first time she asked the question, Joanne said she didn't know what her strengths were, right? So that original question wasn't effective, but then she used some follow-up questions. So were there any techniques or questions or phrasings that you think were effective? So that's one of the questions we have. And then the question I have is, of all the strengths that you mentioned, do you think any of those were creative or non-traditional? So did she come up with anything, or did you come up with anything in your description of the strengths that you think were different? You know, were maybe a little bit outside the box in terms of thinking about something that was a strength. And then the last question to think about is, did Lynda pick up on any strengths based on something that she heard or saw rather than what was asked directly? And then if there's anything to share, if Laura wants to read through the comments for us.
Just as a sidebar, I would have, also noted as a strength that she was able to get on Zoom and use technology, which is going to be helpful in her and her family accessing services.
Okay, any comments? Any thoughts?
This is Mark from Los Angeles. I see a little bit second layer about the photos. She mentioned about she editing it, and it sounds like people who do editing, they know it spend time and patience. They are good friends. So it sounds like she have patience. Then what confirms she has patience? Running is a super boring. Even you put the music in the ears. The idea is to reach the destination or your goal, to finish how many minutes you want to finish your running. It requires patience and discipline. So this is what I observe.
Now, Mark, I happen to agree with you, but you might have just offended a bunch of people in this meeting right now. But yes, yeah, so I appreciate that. So you mentioned patience. So that wasn't something that necessarily came to our minds right away, but it does make sense that that's sort of a quality of that kind of project, that if you are going to edit something, you do need to take your time to do it. You might go through a couple of iterations before you find one that you like. You might actually delete a whole bunch of pictures because you don't like them, because you find something wrong with them, and then you finally find one you like. So I think that's a good point. Any other comments or thoughts? Okay, so I'm gonna go through, because we want to switch gears for a second right now and talk about, now that we've gathered strengths information, how do we then move that into creating a strength-based goal? So again, we're not going to define goals or objectives here, so you can use your own definition, but the idea is that when you're working with an individual, you're going to be required, as part of the work you do, to create some sort of treatment plan or service plan, or whatever the terminology is that your organization uses. And so if we don't take this information on strengths and move it forward in the process, then it's kind of a waste of time. So we want to use it. We want to either use the information that we've gathered, or if we found that there's not a lot of information there, then maybe those are things that we want to work to build. So what we want to think about is, when do we want to decide that we need to work with a client on building strengths? And I think somebody might be off of mute. So if you did take yourself off mute, if you want to put yourself back on, they do hear a little bit of background noise. So you want to think about, when is it clinically relevant to focus on developing a strength and when is it not? If there are, so translated into cans and ANSA and fast language, if there are 2s and 3s for strengths items, how do you decide which ones you're going to build? Or if they're solely 3s, if there are no strengths that have been identified, where do you start? So, it could be a lot when you have all 3s and strengths. You want to start with the individual themselves, because when we talk about strengths, we talk about strengths to build are not required. So where you want to work on 2s and 3s when you have a need, you don't necessarily need to build 2s and 3s when you have strengths. It just depends on whether that's relevant for the individual that you're working with. So for example, with Joanne, one of the things she talked about is that she was previously involved with church, but isn't currently, and is sort of considering maybe thinking about another church. So that's an example where you're probably going to rate that a 2, and you might want to develop a goal with Joanne around that, because it was something that she got some personal benefit out of, and it's something that she's thinking about in the future. You may work with another individual who's never been involved with the organized religion and really isn't interested in doing that, and that's not a strength that you want to build. So remembering with 2s and 3s, it's really going to depend on whether there's some value to the individual to build that. A common example we give too is that, if you have somebody who has clinical depression and they also have a sense of hopelessness and they don't really have a future orientation, you're going to rate them as a 3 on optimism. You want to work on building that optimism, because that's going to help them tackle their depression. So sometimes we're going to build a strength, and sometimes we're going to use an identified strength to address a need. So how do we decide how to do this?
Lynn, just real quick, wanted to give you a 10-minute warning.
Yes, thank you. Oh, goodness. This time's really flying, isn't it? Okay, so we know that it can be challenging. So in this activity that we just gave you, we came up with a lot of potential strengths that we could use, and we came up with a couple of potential needs. And so the question is, how do you figure out how to use those and work together? And so one of the things you want to think about is what naturally fits together. If you are using a version of the tool that still has a paper form, or even if you do it online, one of the great things about this tool is it makes it pretty clear what are your 2s and 3s and needs, and what are your 0s and 1s and strengths. You can very easily just pull out all those items and then take a look at them. So I just gave you an example of depression and optimism. Those things can work together. There are other items that you could do that as well. So I don't know if off the top of your head you can think about that, but adjustment to trauma, for instance, or anxiety, or those kinds of things. You may want to use certain things like natural supports, for instance, to help address the tendency to pull away from other people because of the experience that you had, or the tendency to isolate. So you can see that based on what the individual's vision is for how they want their life to be as they're working with you, you can see which of those items seem to naturally fit together. Obviously, having a conversation with an individual about what strengths they do think that they can leverage to tackle their needs is going to be an important part of that conversation.
And clients will often let you know, have had some that say drawing and they haven't been doing that, and they'll be like, why do I have to come to you to remind me to do these things that I find so much pleasure and joy in? And it's like, well, that's just how it works. And then they get back into their activity that they enjoy, and automatically the depression or anxiety starts to lift a bit.
And I think that sort of goes into our later point about when you're thinking about goals, are you thinking about client self-care? So in some versions of the tools, there's a self-care item. There also is Resilience, in a way, sort of involves some self-care. So you want to think about sometimes working with a client on developing self-care means that you can use that as a natural strength to address a need. And the idea of strengths like needs don't all show up at once. So the longer you work with an individual, you may get more information about strengths, things that they're willing to be vulnerable about, because talking to someone about something that's a strength also opens you up to criticism from other people that maybe it's not a strength, right? I mean, if you like to draw and somebody says, oh, well, your drawing's kind of pedestrian, it's not really, that great, or singing or whatever, it sort of opens you up to some criticism. So people may share strengths later, and you can always incorporate that into your treatment planning later. So we're not going to be able to get to our second exercise, unfortunately. And what that was going to be is we were going to ask you to, using some of the strengths and needs that were identified in this mock assessment, we're going to ask you to come up with a treatment goal. So if anybody wants to do that outside of this training, you're welcome to do that. But what we wanted to do is just walk you through an example. So this is a format that we stole from Illinois. So the strengths goals that Illinois is using on their lifespan version of the CANS and ANSA. And so this is not an example that we expect everybody to use. So you can use whatever format, but what we wanted to highlight here is that you want to gather information from that assessment and then use it. And you can use it in one of two ways. So I talked earlier about how we can either build up a strength or use a strength to address a need. So we wanted to give you some examples of each of those things. So in this example, we have this individual, Wanda. She has anxiety relating to a mugging that happened 3 months ago. This triggered her memory of trauma. She was severely disciplined as a child that led to a need to control things. Previously, she was a social butterfly who loved to organize activities with friends, was a regular in a running group. But since the mugging, she's not willing to leave her house unless somebody's with her. And she's worried about the future. So think about what are some of the needs that we identify and some of the strengths that we identified. So we highlighted here something that we saw was either a need or a strength, and either a strength that we could use or a strength to build. So something like having friends. So being a social butterfly who likes to hang out with people, we can translate that into a natural support, and that's a strength that we can use. Something like optimism or self-care. She used to run, but she's not doing that anymore. She's worried about the future. Those are strengths that we can build. So if her goal is wanting to feel more safe and less anxious, one of our objectives is she'll activate her social network at least once a week and as needed to provide her with support. And then we give some examples. So this might include having her friends be physically present for her, or taking her out for some social activity, or just being emotionally available if she needs to talk. So this is using a strength. An example of building a strength is Wanda and her therapist will develop a list of strategies to increase Wanda's optimism and improve her self-care. Wanda will try out these strategies as part of her weekly homework. So one of the other resources that we have for you in the Socio app is we came up with two different examples, a child and an adult, where we use this kind of formatting. And so we have a couple more examples for you to review. In addition, we also have a document there where we've given you some examples of strengths items from the CANS, the ANSA, and the FAST that we've rated a 0, 1, 2, and 3. So that's a resource for you to review those if you want to have a sense of, well, how would I rate this strength as a 2, or how would I rate this strength as a 1 or as a 0? It's like 14 pages, so it's pretty comprehensive. So we want to offer that to you as a resource. Lynda and I came up with it as just to give you some examples of how you might think about those particular items. So it looks like we have 2 minutes left. So we're going to skip that. and leave these last couple minutes for any questions. And again, I know I went through this really quickly. We really encourage you, the PowerPoint is also in the resources. So if you haven't looked at those resources yet, we really encourage you to do that. And so I want to thank Lynda for doing this with me, and thank you all for listening to us and managing with this not quite as engaging as we would have liked. And then just wanted to question, comments.
So one question was, how do you get the direct care worker to see the importance of giving justification for rating strengths that are rated 0?
So they're
I think I
asking
put
why.
something in.
They're asking why to give a reason for a 0 or 1. Is that what the question is about?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. We're at the beginning stages of implementing the cans, and it's all about the ratings, and we're trying to get through that. And there's a lot of I'm seeing a lot of trends I see a lot of they're rating 0s all the way down with strengths. But I guess as an assessment and planning coordinator, I want to see, why are you rating that a 0? Give me some justification for it. But I mean, it's difficult for them to provide that. So it's kind of difficult to approve that cans whenever you don't have the justification for why you're rating it such as a centerpiece strength.
So I will answer that. Let me pause for a minute, because I know Laura has to give the game code for people that are playing the game and everything. So let's have her share that, and then I will answer your question.
Okay.
The people who want to head out can head out.
Okay, and just so you know, Lynn, there's people responding to Lisa's query as well.
Okay, great.
So let me share my screen. So, go. Okay, so we want to thank Lynn and Lynda for your time, and thank you all for attending. You should see the code for the game. And can enter the key phrase into your Socio app to earn those points towards the prizes. So if you'd like to receive a continuing education unit credit, please make sure you fill out the survey after the conference wraps up on Friday. And please enjoy the rest of the conference.
Is it possible that you could help me real quick find where I can find all the resources that they were talking about?
Sure. If you go into the Socio app and you go to the agenda icon and you go to our specific presentation, I believe there are like 2 tabs. There's like the tab with information about the presentation, and then tab with the participants. I think that first tab with us on there with the description of it, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you should see some attachments there. They should be PDFs.
They were there yesterday, but today they're not. Maybe if I push the plus button. Nope, that's not working.
Weird. Okay, well, I would say, since I'm not the technical person, that's the most I know.
Okay.
I would reach out to somebody, the contact information in the app, for some help. So Lisa,
I just found it. Thank you.
Okay. So Lynda, I don't know. It sounded like you were about to respond, so I don't want to cut you off if you had a response to that.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I thought it was a little deeper, like, how could she help them understand why that information was needed? And so basically, just to say that usually centerpiece strengths are something that people feel very confident or competent about, like person that's a photographer can talk about the camera and how to angle it and all that. And that gives them confidence. And then when somebody has confidence, something that kind of fuels their energy, and they're usually moving forward. And that can really help in the change process if they can take that energy to help them to move. So it's just kind of a different way to kind of look at, helping their workers to understand that those strengths can be used in this change, how it can be used in the change process in various different ways.
Yeah, I think that's good. And what I'll add, Lisa, is for versions that kind of require you to explain the reasoning for the rationale, I mean, for the rating, part of it is for strengths. Oftentimes people make assumptions that strengths exist when they don't. And so if you've rated something as 0, the idea is that this is something that pops out at you. This is something that is such an important piece of this individual that that we're eager to use it to help them address a need. So if you don't give any explanation as to how you came to that 0, then how is someone else who's working with that individual going to know what that means, without having to go back to that person and have that conversation all over again about what they're, why is this a 0 for you? And it's sort of the same. Remember that it's a communication tool at its base. And so the idea of giving some detail about why something was rated a certain way is to help communicate with both the individual and others who are working with the individual. So think about it from this perspective too. Ideally, the cans or the answer or fast is going to be shared with the individual who you're going to be working with, or the family. And so you should be able to share it with them, and they should be able to see how you got to that, because they may or may not agree with you. So from a strengths perspective, if you have someone that you're really trying to pull strengths out of, that really they're having a hard time identifying their own strengths, wouldn't it be helpful to have a description there of why something is a 0? So they can actually see it and say, oh, okay, well, I guess I never realized that, not everybody is good at this, Lynda's the better one with examples, I have to admit. So Lynda's got some great examples from individuals that she's worked with. But I think it sort of helps people see, oh, okay, this is what you mean by something that I'm really good at, or something that is a key, identifier of who I am, like something that is like a part of me in a very deep way.